Mars is making a sharp connection with Uranus just before changing signs, and that can turn a minor shift into a real change of direction. A delay can disappear. A plan can open. A fast reply can alter what happens next. So if life feels unusually quick, do not ignore the first thing that moves. It may be much more important than it looks. April 8th, 2026 is one of those dates where the sky shows speed in a very specific way. Mars is forming a sextile to Uranus while still moving through the last stretch of Pisces, and then on April 9th, Mars enters Aries. That sequence matters. Mars is your push, your engine, your move toward the next thing. Uranus is disruption, surprise, invention, and sudden release from patterns that have gone stale. Put them in contact, then place that contact one day before Mars changes signs, and you get a day that does not behave like a slow build. You get a day where one shift can alter what the next several days ask of you. That is why the title of this moment is not just movement, it is movement with consequences. What makes this even more interesting is where the planets are standing when this happens. Mars is in the last degree of Pisces, which is not a place known for clean, linear timing. Pisces is porous. It can keep something suspended longer than expected. It can blur the edge between waiting, drifting, avoiding, hoping, and preparing. Uranus is still in late Taurus, close to the end of a long chapter that has already been reshaping practical life, money, security, values, and what people can actually sustain. So April 8th has a very particular feel to it. It is not a clean beginning yet, and it is not the old chapter anymore either. It is the hinge between the two. That is why this day should not be read like a dramatic fate story. It is much more useful than that. April 8th is about routing. A lot of people think direction changes because they suddenly feel different. Sometimes that happens. But very often direction changes because timing changes first. The wrong door closes faster than expected. The delayed message finally lands. A person stops hovering. A calendar opens. A cost becomes obvious. A choice that had been living in theory now demands a real-world answer. That is the kind of day this is. The event is not always huge. The effect is. Think about how many lives stay on the same track simply because nothing interrupts the pattern. A person stays in the same routine because the routine, while tiring, is still functioning. A conversation stays unfinished because nobody changes the tone. A work plan remains a possibility because no deadline makes it real. A half commitment keeps going because the inconvenience of changing it has not yet outweighed the inconvenience of carrying it. April 8th can change that math. It can introduce one moment that removes the luxury of delay. Not because the sky is trying to be theatrical, but because Mars and Uranus together are very good at breaking the false comfort of later. And this is where the day becomes personal. The shift may show up first in your schedule, not your philosophy, not your emotions, your schedule. An opening appears where there was no opening. A meeting changes. A delay gets removed. A person answers more quickly than they have in weeks. Something you expected to keep sitting there finally moves. That may sound small, but timing is never small when direction has been waiting on it. 1 hour can matter more than 1 month if it changes what is now possible. It may also show up through interruption. That is another Mars-Uranus signature people often underestimate. Not every interruption is there to waste your day. Some interruptions expose what your day was actually built around. If one change throws everything into confusion, it may be showing you how dependent your direction was on a weak setup. If one surprise suddenly makes the next move obvious, it may be revealing that you had been carrying too much indecision around something that was already ready. Either way, interruption becomes information. That is why this date is useful for anyone who has been living inside a long pause. If you have been waiting for a cleaner signal, this may not arrive as a beautiful sign wrapped in certainty. It may arrive as a practical jolt, a message that changes your options, a development that makes your old plan impossible to keep as it was, a faster timeline than the one you had mentally prepared for. A moment where your first instinct is to say, "That is not how I thought this would happen." And your second thought is, "But now that it has happened, I know exactly what comes next." That second thought matters, because one of the biggest mistakes people make around fast-moving transits is believing the surprise itself is the whole story. It is not. The surprise is often just the lever. What matters is what it moves. What matters is whether the unexpected event removes confusion, exposes a weak point, speeds up a necessary decision, or simply makes you honest about what you wanted all along. Uranus is rarely interested in decoration. When it touches Mars cleanly, it tends to show where movement was available sooner than you thought, or where a new method is better than continuing to force the old one. So how might this actually show up in regular life? For some people, it will hit work first. A professional situation that has been dragging may suddenly stop dragging. A reply arrives. A timing issue resolves. A decision that kept sitting in the background becomes active. A person in charge changes their answer. A conversation that had been stalled finally gets direct. Or, just as importantly, something does not come through, and that tells you more than another week of waiting ever would have. This is the part many people miss. Forward movement is not only when you get what you wanted. Sometimes forward movement is when the wrong option finally makes itself impossible to keep pretending about. For other people, the shift shows up in plans they kept improving instead of executing. This transit has very little patience for polishing something that needs a real-world test. So if you have been refining, adjusting, studying, watching, asking, reworking, and waiting for the perfect time, April 8th can act like a threshold. It does not have to complete the whole matter. It may simply produce the one change that makes continuing to delay feel more foolish than beginning imperfectly. That is still a major directional event. For some, the reroute happens through people. A person says less than expected, and suddenly, their position becomes clear. Another person says more than expected, and the whole situation changes shape. An offer comes in from a direction you were not focused on. A conversation that seemed routine reveals a much bigger next step. A silence breaks, a pattern breaks. Or, and this matters too, you realize how much of your energy has been tied up in waiting for one person to do something when life is already moving somewhere else. Mars and Uranus do not always bring closeness. Sometimes they bring release from the wrong center of gravity. It can also show up in practical matters that look boring until they change everything. A number, a fee, a timing window, transport, paperwork, access, a tool that finally works, a system that stops working, a simple yes, a quick no, an opening that appeared because you tried one different approach instead of repeating the usual one. Uranus has a way of rewarding the alternative route when the standard route has become wasteful. Under a supportive contact with Mars, that can look like efficiency rather than chaos. That distinction is important. This is not automatically a messy day. It can be an unusually effective one. And if life feels slightly electric on April 8th, there is a reason. The larger month is already loaded with momentum. April is carrying a heavy Aries emphasis, and Mars entering Aries on April 9th intensifies the whole atmosphere immediately after this transit. So April 8th is not floating alone. It sits right before a stronger acceleration point. That means whatever shifts here may not have much interest in staying theoretical. It can become active quickly. This is the section I really want you to pay attention to, because it is what makes April 8th different from an ordinary, fast day. April 9th is the push. That is the right way to understand this sequence. On April 8th, the root changes. On April 9th, Mars enters Aries and asks what you are going to do about it. So if April 8th brings the opening, the interruption, the invitation, the release, the quicker-than-expected shift, April 9th raises the pressure to act on the new conditions. This is why the date in your title works so well. Things are happening quickly, not only because one transit is exact. They are happening quickly because the next day changes the operating speed of the month. And once you understand that, the strategy becomes much smarter. You do not need to force April 8th into some giant performance. You need to observe what gets unstuck, what gets interrupted, what gets rerouted, and what suddenly becomes simpler than it was last week. That is the information. The next day tells you what to do with it. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone has been hovering around a career decision. They are still thinking, still considering, still trying to gather one more opinion before making a move. On April 8th, a small change lands. Someone else gets reassigned. A deadline changes. A meeting is moved up. An opportunity opens that was not open before. None of those things is the whole story by itself. But together, they alter the route. Then on April 9th, the emotional hesitation does not fit anymore because the new conditions now require action. That is a hinge. Or think about relationships. A person may spend weeks trying to read mixed timing, uncertain language, and slow replies. Then one quick exchange on April 8th changes the pace. Maybe the other person becomes unexpectedly direct. Maybe they disappear into a silence that says more than another long talk ever could. Maybe someone else enters the picture in a way that changes your focus. Maybe you stop trying to interpret because the situation finally becomes obvious in a practical way. Then April 9th arrives, and it is no longer about analysis. It is about response. That is also a hinge. Or maybe the shift is entirely internal, but still not soft. You wake up with the same old plan, and by the end of the day, you no longer believe in it. Not because you had some beautiful breakthrough, but because the day exposed how much energy it was wasting. Then the next day, you do not want to keep rehearsing the same plan, because something in you has already turned toward motion. Again, that is the hinge. This is why April 8th should not be treated like a date where you merely absorb energy. That language is too passive for what is actually going on. This is a day where timing can reveal direction, and direction can change before the mind has fully caught up. If you insist on over-explaining every shift before you respect it, you may slow down something that is actually trying to help you. Now, that does not mean every quick change deserves instant loyalty. This is where discernment matters. A real opening usually does one of three things. It reduces unnecessary friction. It makes the next step more obvious. Or it exposes what can no longer keep going in the same form. Empty urgency does the opposite. It makes everything feel equally dramatic. It floods your focus. It pressures you to react before the facts are stable. It turns movement into noise. That difference matters enormously on April 8th. A useful shift may feel sudden, but it usually has coherence. Once it happens, pieces start fitting. The route gets clearer. The timing makes sense even if it came fast. A noisy shift, by contrast, creates agitation without direction. It makes you feel like you must do something immediately, but when you look closely, there is no actual path there, only intensity. Mars-Uranus can do both in weaker conditions. But in a supportive aspect like this, the healthier expression is innovation, release from a rut, quicker progress, and the courage to try the method that actually fits the moment. So, if you want to use this day well, ask better questions. Not, how do I hold on to the old plan? Better question, does the old plan still fit the day I am actually in? Those are stronger questions for this transit because they keep you oriented toward direction, not drama. And there is one more layer here that makes April 8th especially potent. Mars is at the end of Pisces when this happens. That means some people may feel like the old style of pushing is no longer workable even before the new one fully begins. The transit can show where drifting has gone too far, where waiting has stopped being wise and started becoming costly, where being flexible has turned into being unavailable to your own next step. Late Pisces can tolerate ambiguity for a long time, but Mars there eventually gets tired of carrying goals through fog. Uranus can cut through that by introducing one event that makes the fog less relevant than the root. That is why you may see overdue matters move first. The plan that has required too much imagination just to keep it feeling alive. This kind of transit does not always create a brand new road from nothing. Sometimes it simply makes an old road impossible to keep walking, without admitting that it no longer goes where you say you want to go. That is an important difference, because many people hear unexpected shift and imagine a total life overhaul landing in one afternoon. That is not the only way change works. More often, the day changes direction by changing what you can honestly continue. It narrows, it exposes, it simplifies, it speeds up the part that is already done pretending. That can look less cinematic than people expect, but in real life it is often much more powerful. And if you have been feeling that some part of your life is one interruption away from changing shape, April 8th may be that interruption. If you have been suspecting that one different choice could free up more momentum than another month of thinking, April 8th may show you that directly. If you have been dragging something forward because it once made sense, not because it still does, April 8th may be the day it stops cooperating. That does not mean panic, it means response. That word is the real key here, response, not reaction. Response. Reaction is blind speed. Response is aligned speed. Reaction just moves because the day feels charged. Response notices where the route changed and moves in proportion to that. Reaction makes noise. Response makes decisions. Reaction turns every surprise into a crisis. Response sorts what matters from what merely arrived loudly. And once Mars enters Aries on April 9th, that difference becomes even more obvious, because Aries energy will not patiently carry a dead plan for the sake of appearances. It wants a line of action. It wants a direction that can be lived, not just discussed. That is why April 8th matters. It gives you the clue just before the pace picks up. Stay alert to what loses relevance the moment one new fact appears. Stay alert to the option you had not been centering that now looks more workable than the option you kept overfeeding with time and attention. That is not superstition. That is timing intelligence. If a person becomes more direct, pay attention to the direction of that honesty instead of getting stuck on how unusual it is. If your own priorities shift in the middle of the day, do not automatically call that inconsistency. It may be evidence that the circumstances have changed enough to require a different answer. And above all, do not drag a worn-out answer into a day that is clearly asking a different question. That may be the strongest line in this whole reading. Do not drag a worn-out answer into a day that is clearly asking a different question, because that is how people miss useful transits. Not by being unaware that something shifted. They miss them by insisting on solving the new day with old logic. April 8th is not old logic. It is a change in route just before a change in pace. And by the time April 9th arrives, the month becomes less interested in theories. Mars in Aries adds sharpness, initiative, and willingness to move first. So if April 8th introduces the adjustment, the next day amplifies the need to act on it. That is why this is not just a nice transit to notice. It is a strategic date in the month. The good news is that Mars-Uranus in a supportive contact can help you do something many people struggle with: change direction without collapsing into chaos. It can make change feel cleaner, faster, yes, but cleaner. It can help you stop wasting energy on a route that only kept existing because you had not tested another one yet. It can help you try the new method, make the first call, move the timing up, break from the stale pattern, or simply admit that the day has already told you what the next move is. And that is where I want to leave this. April 8th does not need to become a giant emotional event in order to matter. It can matter because it changes what happens next. It can matter because one interruption saves you from a worse delay. It can matter because one quick turn reveals that the old direction had been weakening for longer than you wanted to admit. It can matter because life suddenly stops negotiating with your hesitation and hands you a cleaner route. So when this day arrives, do not ask whether it feels important enough. Ask whether it changed the road. If it exposed the weak point in your plan, be grateful you saw it before carrying it deeper into the month. Because once Mars crosses into Aries, the question will not be whether life gave you a sign. The question will be what you did after the route changed. And on a date like this, that is everything. If something shifts fast for you on April 8th, pay attention to the first change, not just the biggest one. That first change may be the one that bends the rest of the month. And if you want more timing like this, stay close.